We are going live in 5, 4, 3, 2.
All right, guys, I wanted to welcome our very special guests with some music from the TV show, the UK sitcom Men Behaving Badly. But then my engineer, Shad, reminded me, it's YouTube, they're fascists, you can't play music. So you'll just have to play that music in your head, guys and gals, because the birds are going to love it, clearly. I am so excited. These guys have a very special product. If you're not familiar with it, it's called Triggernometry with 2 G's for a reason. I have to start by introducing Francis Foster, Konstantin Kisin. Before we get down to the subjects that I wish to discuss with you guys, no script, completely free flow, live now. I'll probably use some of it on my national radio show later today or tomorrow. Is first 2 questions. I just have to get it out of the way, gentlemen. Is Anton real, and what is it with donuts?
So Anton is very real. He's our third producer. Our first 2 producers couldn't handle the heat of the show, so we had to find one who's on board. And it's interesting because, as you know, we're sort of centrist in our political leanings, but Anton is actually quite left-wing, voted for Jeremy Corbyn in the last election. So we have a diverse production team.
All right, and his mum, I want to know, is his mum watching now?
Is Mrs. Anton watching now? I'm not sure. We'll probably send her the link.
Send her the link. And what is it? Come on, FF. What is it with the donuts?
What is it with the donuts? I don't know where this donut thing came from. I'm going to be honest with you.
It came from you stuffing your face with one live on camera. That's where it came from.
I think it came from the fact that despite all my efforts, middle-aged spread is starting to happen. I'm fighting the good fight, but nothing seems to be working.
I hope you appreciate the photograph. I posted that Twitter posting today, and I went to great lengths to find the most flattering photograph. I mean, come on, KK's hair looked superb. You looked a little bit lighter, FF. So I want full kudos for the photographs I picked today. And lastly, what on earth was the flavor of that freaking donut Anton bought? What was it? Blueberry what?
Oh, it was blueberry compote and peanut. Disgusting. Absolutely
foul. Foul. It should be illegal.
Exactly.
All right.
It's not even apologetic.
All right, I'm still not sure whether he exists. If he photobombs us at some point, I will be satisfied. Okay, guys. So I don't know how much you know about me, but I think I love your show so much, and I'm surprised you introduce yourself as centrist because. My parents, as kids, lived under fascism, under communism. My dad resisted the dictatorship in Hungary, was betrayed by a British spy, Kim Philby, arrested, tortured by the secret police, got a life sentence at age of 20, and then was liberated in the Revolution of '56 and made it out to the UK. Now I live in the US. I'm an American citizen, worked in the White House. But you guys... I have to know, and it's a cheeky question, but it's half serious. How did a pair of British, Venezuelan, Jewish comedians get to be such bigoted, problematic troublemakers?
I feel like you're using a lot of the in terms that we use on the show, and it should be made clear that they're used with irony, Seb.
But tell the story. I think the story that everybody has to hear, because we have different, listeners and viewers here. The story about you, I think, was UKK when you went to do a stand-up. And they wanted you to sign something or to promise that you wouldn't offend certain groups. Could you tell that story to my viewers?
Yeah, of course. So this was just after Triggernometry started. We'd been going for probably about 6 months. So we were still doing comedy at the time. And I was invited to perform at a university here in London. And when they invited me, they sent me a contract which said that they have a zero tolerance policy on racism, sexism, classism, ageism, ableism, homophobia, biphobia, transphobia, xenophobia, Islamophobia, anti-religion, anti-atheism. And it also said that all jokes must be respectful and kind.
But did it say that white heterosexual guys are okay to make fun of?
It didn't specify that, but I'm sure that would have been implied in the contract. Interestingly, also Jews were not mentioned, so you couldn't be anti anything, but Jews were fine, maybe because we're so powerful. Anyway. I don't know. So that was shortly into the story of Triggernometry, and I think it really spoke to why we started the show, because as comedians we were starting to sense that there was something very odd going on. There was something going on in the comedy world where suddenly certain things you couldn't talk about and couldn't joke about, even if you were doing so from a respectful point of view. And there was this culture of hypersensitivity, and what we wanted to do was find out where that was coming from. And, the journey that we've been on since, we can maybe talk about a little bit later.
Sure. Well, I'll do it with FF. You always ask the same question to your guests. So who are you and how did you get to where you are today?
Well, I started off actually as a teacher. I was a teacher for 12 years, slowly segued into comedy. Mother is from a Venezuelan background. And I loved comedy originally because it had this punk ethos to it. It was about freedom. It was about saying whatever you want. It was about testing the limits, the boundaries. And rapidly, I would say post-2016, post-Brexit, things became more and more narrow about the things that you could joke about. And it got to the point where if you said a joke on stage, which was ironic, people would take literally. And I started to notice audiences not only becoming more sensitive, but also a very, very small minority becoming more emboldened and more censorious, and complaints starting to rise because I was always helping to run a comedy club as well. So seeing the water change before my very eyes was actually quite worrying. And then it started to progress down a certain line, and it very much mirrored what was going on in the United States, which I've got to say, Seb, thank you very much for importing this stuff over here. We're absolutely loving it.
I think it was a guy in Hampstead Heath called Karl Marx, I think, who started it, okay? So if we want to get politically correct. So, and how did you guys meet? How did you guys get together and the idea of the podcast get born?
Well, we used to gig together quite a lot, and I think we weren't necessarily sure where we each were. But actually, one of the things we should mention as well, you talked about your family background, which is fascinating. And I know that when you've experienced as a family something like that, it informs your thinking for the rest of your life. You can't ignore certain things. And Francis and I, Francis mentioned his family being from Venezuela, where they've suffered a lot from the regime there. My family from the Soviet Union, and whichever side of my family you look at, people have been in the gulags, people have been repressed, people have been exiled, etc. So when we get a lot of sort of Eastern European viewers of our show as well, people who are from Eastern Europe but now live in the West, because alarm bells are ringing, Seb. People are starting to notice some of the things that they saw 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago, the sort of things that their parents and grandparents told them about. And so I think that's probably part of where Francis and I came together as well. We share an understanding that what we have here in the West is precious, it's unusual, it's unique, it's valuable, and it's very, very easy to destroy.
Did you guys, let me ask you, with the Venezuelan background, with the Soviet background, I just want to do this for my own personal sanity check. Did you ever think that a woman who escaped communist Poland came here to America, created her own business, has a restaurant, would be arrested last week because she wanted to keep her restaurant open? And then she'd say, before she was arrested on Fox News, she said, yeah, this reminds me of growing up in communist Poland. Did you guys, I know it's not a British context, but we're seeing so much similarity with the police. I saw the video of Lawrence, Lawrence Fox.
Lawrence Fox.
Fox, with the cops coming to his door to say, we don't have any evidence that you've broken COVID. So why are you at his front door? Did you guys ever expect, irrespective of your politics, that we would be witnessing these kinds of phenomena on both sides of the pond?
If you had told me 2 years ago that I would now live in a country where mass gatherings and protests are illegal, I would tell you that you have lost your mind. The fact that mass gatherings and protests are now illegal in the United Kingdom is nothing short of a disgrace. And it has been proven time and time again that actually it's very, very rare for COVID to be spread in that fashion. Yeah. To me, it's control. It's controlling people. It's controlling what people can and can't do. And I see it as nothing else than a glorified police state.
Do you guys subscribe to the idea that there's some darker, ulterior motive here, or it's just the mediocre, risk-averse bureaucrats who are just out of control?
Well, let me turn the table on you, Seb, because you've worked in government, right?
Right.
Do you believe that conspiracies in this way, orchestrated like that, are possible, that the government has the competence to do something like that and keep it secret? Do you think that?
I really appreciate the question. So I love conspiracy theories as entertainment. I've got bookshelves of the stuff. But if anybody dares, and it happens every week, if anybody dares call up my national radio show, yesterday we had one. What was it? It was somebody who'd served in... What? Oh, yeah. Somebody, a former serviceman, served in Iraq or Afghanistan, rings up, loves the show, and he says, well, he used the phrase false flag attack for the recent shooting here. And then he says, 9/11 and Building 7. And every time I lose it, I just have an epi, because I think, I saw this in Central Europe. One of my first jobs was training young politicians from the Balkans, conservatives, on how to function in a civil society after the end of the Yugoslav war. And I heard all these conspiracy theories, it's the Jews, it's the Americans, it's the capitalists. And I realized that this is a way to avoid responsibility. I can't run my life because it's somebody over there who's running it. And also, it just kills critical thought. So for me, to answer your question, as somebody who's been a Defense Department employee for 6 years, spent time in the White House as advisor to President Trump, I'll tell you, government usually can't fight its way out of a paper bag that's wet. Okay, so right. The idea that there are master plans is garbage. However, there are ideologues. I mean, Fauci is a disaster. Look at what Fauci did in the 80s with AIDS. He was a walking disaster. Look at his track record, how he got everything wrong on AIDS. The fact that he is the highest paid bureaucrat in America right now, $413,000 a year as a bureaucrat, is stunning. It's the age of zero consequences. But there are hardcore ideologues who go in there and they use power to their own ideological ends. There's a reason the head of the Domestic Policy Council, the most powerful body in the White House, who's now Susan Rice, who's really running the shop, is a non-Senate confirmed position, because she wouldn't get any Senate confirmation because she's such a radical. So to your point, KK, master conspiracies in government, no. Small, vicious individuals exploiting the power they get when they're in there, and more importantly, exploiting the cowardice of others who don't say, hang on, wait, what are you talking about? This is Britain. We can't have public gatherings in the land of Churchill and the Magna Carta. I think that's it's a slightly more complicated answer, but I think the ideologues are definitely out there.
Well, I'm sort of with you on that to some extent. I think it's true that the governments can't organize this sort of stuff. But as you say, there are people who will use it. And you can't even necessarily blame them. Like if you're a police officer, you don't really have necessarily a responsibility to respect people's freedoms. You want as many restrictive laws as possible because you think that's how you stop crime or that's how you stop disorder or whatever. And people will use this as an opportunity to achieve their goals nefariously or otherwise. So I do think we have seen that. I don't buy this, conspiracy narrative. But what I would say is, we've been, it's not going to happen now, but we've been having serious conversations about, moving to the United States at some point, given everything that's going on.
Are you serious?
Absolutely, man. Look, how can we live in a society where 80+% of people supposedly demand harder and stricter lockdowns, while the polling from yesterday shows that over 70% of people don't actually follow the lockdown? All right. So the same people that are demanding more restrictions are the ones that aren't following them, and they're giving away our freedoms.
I will say this, Seb. I don't read conspiracy theories anymore because I'm at the state now where I probably believe all of them. I'd go around and just go, that makes sense, that's on the money.
All right, probably a wise move. Okay, so in that case, you guys help me out. So I was born and bred in England, grew up in West London. in a part of London, in Ealing, that was so flipping multi-ethnic. I mean, it was a part of London where the Poles who fought for the Brits during World War II, the Free Poles, were given housing after the war, full of Poles. I went to a school where my best mates were Indian, Pakistani, Italian. The bus driver was Jamaican. We didn't have any. I mean, look, we'd have rough and tumble, right? It was a playground where a few punches were thrown, but it was all at the end of the day, it wasn't serious. But today, I look at what I'm hearing. I haven't been back to the UK in years. I left in '93. I had faith that if push comes to shove, the Tommies who were in the trenches at Verdun, the Brits who were storming the beaches in 44 and 45 and Battle of Britain would come to the top, and they'd say, bollocks, this is enough. And I look at Brexit and I see, but for the grace of God, that was almost scuppered. The House of Lords and the House of Commons and the billionaires and the lawyers and the BBC tried to sabotage that for 4 years, and you just kind of scraped through at the last minute. So I want an explanation. Has the bulldog spirit been utterly undermined? Are Brits just fat and lazy now and they just want to tune into Netflix? Or what from inside the wire, what happened?
I think what has happened is that the government has essentially done Project Fear, whereby people now think that
explain Project Fear to the Americans.
So, for instance, it's the message has been that if you talk to somebody, if you interact with an old person, you're going to, inverted commas, kill granny. And that is what people have been exposed to right from the very, very, very beginning. We've seen adverts with people with an old person with an oxygen mask on their face, and the slogan is something along the lines of tell them that you're only popping out to go and see friends, or tell them that you're only going to one party, or something like that. So people now believe that if you have any sort of form of social gathering or whatever else, that this is going to be the start of another explosion, another pandemic, whatever it may be. And as a result of that, people are terrified. People are genuinely terrified, to the point where I feel that we're going to face a real battle going to get people to actually go back into offices, to get reintegrated back into their social life, even once they've had the vaccination, because people are terrified now. And that's been the government's doing.
Absolutely. So that is exactly what has happened. I think the fear, and it shows in how irrational the responses are. I tweeted something the other day. Basically, we've had one of the most successful vaccination programs in the world, and every person who is vulnerable clinically or due to age is now vaccinated, right? We've done that. So why are we've still got a lockdown that's going to last for another 3 months at the very least, and it'll probably continue from there. And yet, anyone who says, as we do, well, it's time to open up, they're automatically anti-vax, or all of these smears come out. People start calling you names because they don't have an argument. And we've just got, and this is why I talked about moving to America at some point. I just don't want to live in a country where, at a moment's notice, everything is shut down. We've now got a fine of about $7,500 for going on holiday.
I saw the headlines that holidays will be illegal, and I thought this was a joke. This was the Onion, and I thought I'll click on it, and it wasn't. So, all right, let me give you some advice. If you're coming over here, welcome to you, but you got to be selective, okay? There's 50 states. Choose the right ones, because right now where I am in the swamp, it's a disaster. DC is a ghost town. There's a 3-mile-long, 12-foot-high, razor-wire-tipped fence around Congress with 6,000 National Guard with M16s guarding it, because hey, that's democracy, and they didn't steal the election, honest. So, you want to look at South Dakota or Texas or somewhere else. But to your point, can I just add, because I was listening to the radio on the way in, so my colleague, if you guys aren't familiar with him, Dennis Prager, I call him my rabbi. He's a super smart guy. And he was talking on his show today. They are the president and Kamala tweeted out a photograph of themselves far apart with nobody around them with masks on. And they're people who've both been vaccinated. Just to absorb that for a second. There's nobody there, they're separated, and they've both been vaccinated. and they're wearing masks, which is, it's not even subliminal. What's the message? The vaccine doesn't really work, and you're going to have to wear masks forever. I mean, that's redolent of Project Fear, correct?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly feels that way, and it feels that way in this country. And like I said, they've used it to change things about our society forever. So, for example, I think when everything opens up, I don't think cash is going to exist anymore. They've increased the limit on the card transactions to £100. That means that cash is effectively done, which means the government is going to make it far easier to track every single one of your transactions. We've seen they've essentially made protests illegal. Priti Patel is at the moment introducing a bill whereby, a protest can get shut down if it causes unease, in inverted commas.
That's the Home Secretary, right? Who was deemed to be a conservative champion.
Well, this is the amazing thing, Seb, is that, Francis and I, neither of us would describe ourselves as conservative in the party sense at all. But we've got a conservative government, and it's that government that's giving all these freedoms away. That is the amazing thing. I think you're going to start to see some sort of electoral difficulties now, because you don't have a party that represents the group of people who don't want any of this anymore, because traditionally you would have thought, if you want a bit more freedom, less market interference, blah, 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 well, you vote for a right-leaning party. Well, we did. Overwhelmingly at the last election, the country voted for the Conservative government, and it's the Conservative government that's taking your freedoms away. And just, the amount of money we've spent paying people not to work for a year, paying children, making sure that children don't go to school. You think that's not going to have an impact long run? I mean, that's crazy.
Well, everybody loves the CDC here amongst the chattering classes, and I just quote to them a CDC report from last year where they found that in June, because of the lockdown, a quarter of American adolescents contemplated suicide. You think that's not going to change a generation? So what does it mean? Nigel is gone. Nigel says he's retired, Nigel Farage. Who's going to push back? Is Lawrence Fox enough? What are you guys seeing in terms of some kind of organic response to Project Fear and to the theft of your civil liberties?
I think the problem is, Seb, is that we are currently a democracy which we don't have an opposition party. The Labour Party is not a credible opposition. It won in the 2019 general election, 19% under Corbyn. If anything, they're more ineffective under Starmer, because at least with Corbyn, they had an ideology. You knew what Labour stood for. Now they're even more pro-lockdown than the Tories. They're even more anti-civil liberties. We don't have any credible opposition. And I'm going to be honest with you, I'm really, really, really worried, because if they, as it seems, they're slowly and steadily trying to criminalize protesting, what are we going to be left with? Yeah. We're going to be left with Venezuela, effectively.
All right.
Well, yeah, because you've got no political route and you've got no civil disobedience route left to you either. And Lawrence Fox is standing for mayor. We'll see how well he does. But as Francis says, we need. This is why when we talked earlier about being in the center, on the left, on the right. I think being in the center is very important, because I'm a floating voter. If you offer me a set of policies and a leader that I can get behind, I'll vote for them, whether they're right leaning or left leaning. And I've voted in every way in the past, right? But we don't have those options anymore. We have a Conservative Party that's not conservative. You have a Labour Party that's useless. And in our system, you don't really get a third party, much like in the United States, actually. So that's why we're talking about moving to America. So,
look, I want this to be more of a conversation than an interview. So if you'll let me respond, we have a saying here in America: if you're in the middle of the road, you're going to get run over. And I think you guys are clearly passionate. You're so passionate about the things that make the West good. You're very passionate about what representative government really means and the threats to it. And I think those are things that are non-negotiable. I couldn't ever see Konstantin Kisin or Francis Foster saying, well, we need more censorship, and maybe we should not have public gatherings anymore. I think for you, those are absolute no-go areas. And as such, you clearly do do have a political identity, and I don't think it's in the middle. If I can just respond, I think your problem, KK, is that the labels of left and right mean nothing anymore. They're dead. Right. They're moribund because conservatives are fascists and the left wing are Stalinists, right? So and they aren't really on two edges of a spectrum. If you remember, Mussolini was a complete socialist and Hitler loved him. So what we're looking at is a rejigging of political identity. And I think it really started with Brexit, but it goes all the way to India, it goes to Modi, it goes to Australia, it goes to Trump, and it's become pejorative because the left are such sneaky bastards. But the word is populism, which is weird because why would populism be a bad word? Because it means a lot of people like your ideas. That's a good thing, isn't it? So I think what we are all struggling with is finding that new home for the ideas that we have that is credibly represented. And the problem is the credible representation, right? That there isn't the organic, credible representation. And God bless Lawrence Fox, but he's got a long way to go, doesn't he?
It does, but what I would say to you is in terms of left and right and all that stuff, I mean, I do think those labels are increasingly useless. But what I would say is, what you're talking about really is authoritarian versus anti-authoritarian, right? And I'm very, very much on the anti-authoritarian side of things. But I think it's important to mention that, 30 years ago, it would have been people on the conservative right who were demanding censorship of many things, comedy, music, etc.
Margaret Whitehouse, right.
Right. And that's why I don't think I'm on the right or the left in that sense, because the issues I care about, and plus, there's so much nuance to all these things. I know, for example, you're a big fan of guns, right?
Yeah.
And if I lived in America, I would definitely own a firearm. I would train to use it.
I've heard you say that, yeah.
But on the other hand, do I think, would I prefer to live in a society that allows gun ownership? No, I wouldn't. Right. So a lot of these issues are very complicated, but we boil them down into these overly simplistic left, right, up, down, wrong, right. So that's why the label of centrism is useful to me. It's not because I'm in the middle of the road. Some of my views are very strongly held on both sides. For example, I think inequality is a huge issue. And insofar as people on the right wish to ignore it, I think they're wrong and mistaken. Some of them do, not all. And equally, there's common sense stuff like controlling immigration. I don't understand why it's only the right that cares about that. If you're on the left, illegal immigration is driving down the wages of your voter base. Right. How are you not against illegal immigration? None of this stuff makes any sense when you look at it in that way. So that's why, I think I try to have a slightly more sophisticated balance of these things. But of course, people want to shove you in a box.
Yeah, I know. Labels are, naff at the best of times. Francis?
No, I was going to say, but one thing that we're seeing, and we've talked about it again and again, is the authoritarianism, and the desire for that is creeping in amongst both left and right. And you saw this immediately during COVID. It's exacerbated it, where everybody wants a lockdown harder, faster, stronger, and that's both conservative and that's Labour. And the thing that's very, very worrying is that people are saying, like I talked to a friend who identifies as being the sort of left-wing liberal and was going to me, well, why do we need freedom of speech in the age of a pandemic? And when you have both sides of the political spectrum espousing this point of view, you think that actually democracy we're in real danger now. In real danger. The political system doesn't work. The people aren't given any options. The labels are meaningless. The parties are meaningless. Yeah. So what are we left with?
Yeah. There's Francis Foster with a note of optimism there. Let me.
We're left with donuts. We're left with donuts.
Yeah.
Well, donuts are always good, but let me add maybe a note of positivity that might be useful. The old Andrew Bryby saying how politics is downstream of culture. The culture, I feel, is starting very slowly to shift. We are in conversations here with some TV people about doing some of our comedy online and stuff like that. And who knows where that'll go. But I just noticed that these people who have a roster full of woke comedians and all the rest of it, they know, Seb. They know.
Yeah,
they see the writing on the wall now. They see it coming.
I can't
see it
wait.
come.
It may be not the young ones, it may be the slightly less young ones, but I think you two guys should be the core of that. I love that idea. Look, let me ask you on that exactly, because you're such smooth operators. In the last 90 seconds, both of you have got your triggered mugs into picture, just very subtly. I saw that trigonometry mug. Nicely done. Talk to us, because you guys have been through the ringer, just like a guy who worked in the White House for DJT. You've been called all kinds of things, alt-right, you name it. So share with because we have 3 million listeners on the radio show. I want to talk about this later and use some clips. Talk about your experience, why you did the podcast, and what it has done to you guys. What has it shocked you? In what ways has it shocked you? And how has the experience been?
It has been shocking in a way, because I think before that, Konstantin, but to a greater extent myself, I was in what I would call a left liberal echo chamber, where all you're essentially that is happening to you is that you're being fed narratives, you regurgitate narratives. And what we did on Triggernometry, and what we always try and do, is get people on from left, right, even though those are archaic terms. But we will interview Nigel Farage, and yet the episode that is going out tonight, we're interviewing the co-founder of Extinction Rebellion.
Wow.
And we're talking to these people, letting them speak. We're challenging them, but it's not in the mainstream media, interrupt them every 40 seconds going, but hang on, if you said this, but last year you said that. We're listening to their ideas. And what's really revolutionary about that is that you're having to challenge not only your opinions, but also the way you see the world. And when you start to do that, you realize, as Konstantin said before, there is nuance to everything. It's not just binary. It's not just narratives. And the reality is, if you're going to get to grips with any of these issues, whether it be Brexit, whether it be Trump, whether it be populism, you've got to realize there's nuance and there's shades of grey within every issue. And that's really tricky to admit.
Konstantin?
Well, what I would say is, this is my one opportunity to say I was always right from the beginning. When Francis and I sat down and I said, let's do the show, I did warn him that we would get called all sorts of things, and it did come to pass. But you know what, and you'll probably know this yourself, Seb, there's a difference between, it's one of my favorite quotes from The Matrix, is there's a difference between knowing the path and walking the path. And it is a little bit of a shock when your Jewish grandfather died on the Eastern Front fighting Nazis for you to be called a Jewish Nazi. That is quite special. That is quite an experience. And when I turned down that contract that we talked about, we had this crazy feminist comedian, if there's such a thing, calling me that. And I just thought these people, some of the people on the far left and the far right, both the extremes, they're absolutely deranged. They don't care about the truth. They don't care about facts. They are just interested in advancing their agenda. And you saw this last night with this, the murder, the mass shooting, where people immediately said this is white supremacy. Turns out the guy's a Syrian Muslim. That's still white supremacy. Turns out he only killed white people. Still white supremacy. And that's all they care about. And some of the discourse on some of this stuff is just so deranged. And what we're trying to do is make human beings three-dimensional again, right? We're stuck in this, especially now in lockdown, at home, and we think of each other no longer as people, but as these two-dimensional characters. And it's fine to attack people. It's fine to call you a Nazi. It's fine to call you names. It's fine to, assassinate your character. And what we're trying to do is show you, well, the guy who co-founded Extinction Rebellion may not be the two-dimensional caricature you think, and so is Nigel Farage.
And that'll be tonight. That's the next interview on Triggernometry.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's talk about one of the recent ones, because I want to give people some positive ammunition as well. That's rhetorical, by the way, Media Matters, if you're watching. You recently, I set this up, I reached out to you, because I watch all the ones that come up on my YouTube feed from Triggernometry. But recently you had, I think he's a former teacher now, Calvin Robinson, who is, half Jamaican, half Irish, okay? So he looks black. And that, for me, you've interviewed some big names, and I enjoy all of it. But that particular episode was stunning for me, because I don't think I've seen an example of such healthy patriotism coming from a Brit as I did from this big afro, half black school teacher who was just celebrating British values and knocking down the insanity of those who want to say that anything that went before is evil and imperial and colonial. Isn't that a kind of ray of hope? If we have more Calvins, then we can probably bring our nations back from the brink?
It is very, very true. We need, and he actually mentioned this himself at the end of the episode, where more people need to stand up, more people need to say what they believe, and more people need, again, the word nuance comes in, to look at our history and realize that it's nuanced. There were incredible things that this country did, as well as awful things as well. And it's not binary, it's not black, it's not white. And we need to be able to accept that. And we need to be able to have a sane, sensible and rational discussion about it. And I think that Calvin was right. More people do need to step up. Before, I used to say to people, look, don't get involved. If it means you losing your job, whatever it is. And we've had some awful things said to us, lost friendships and all the rest of it. But ultimately, if you believe that this is important and you want a society that remains, well, not remains the way it is, because at the moment society is absolutely gone. But if you want society to be like it used to, then you need to fight for it. Otherwise, you've seen what's happened with COVID.
Yeah.
I'm really glad you bring up the issue of values and patriotism, Seb, because I think this is so important for people in the West to understand. And as someone who comes from outside, it's easier to see. I'm working on my first book, which will be called An Immigrant's Love Letter to the West.
Wow.
And this is really the point that I want to hit home. People need to understand in the West that what we have here is precious. It's rare. It's extremely difficult to maintain. And if we do not remember what our values are, and we don't speak up for them, if we don't protect them, if we're not patriotic in a healthy way, the West will die, like every great civilization before. And what comes in place of that is going to be China or Russia. Now, as someone who comes from Russia, I can tell you that's not a pleasant outcome. I know a lot of Chinese people. I promise you, if you care about, as people on the left claim to care about racism and, inequality and oppression, well, a world dominated by China, I'm not sure that's going to be less racist. I'm sorry. Right? So we need to remember.
But the donuts aren't that good. The light cheese are better.
Yeah.
Yeah, bat donuts are probably not the best. But look, I think people in the West really need to understand that this is a civilizational issue. All this woke stuff, it's not just games. And I said this at the time when I turned down that contract in 2018. People were like, why do you care so much about these students sending you this contract? And I was saying to them, 5-10 years from now, these are the idiots that are going to be running our country.
And they are. One thing, two things that surprised me, and I'm going to repost that, guys. So if you're interested, the interview with Calvin Robertson, go to my Twitter feed, Seb Gorka, SEBGORKA. Look for us on Facebook, and we'll repost it. Please watch it. It's superlative. Two things, guys. Seriously, the BBC? You think it's salvageable? Come on, wake up and smell the coffee grinds. And secondly, KK, the whole statues issue. You were so open to this idea that we can have a discussion, we can negotiate about whether statues stay. Let me give you a piece of advice I learned from somebody else. You never negotiate with Marxists, and that's who these people are. That's my contribution.
Who gave you that advice?
I'm trying to think now. I'm trying to think now. Somebody who had a personal experience, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. Well, look, the BBC, maybe Francis can talk about it. The statues is the one that you brought up with me. Look, the point of our show is to be open-minded and to listen to different points of view. So I will always be keen to explore those. I'll make up my own mind at the end of it. I don't think people should go around tearing things down that they don't like. Do I think that people who were, whose main thing was that they were slave traders should be up in our cities? Well, I think that should be a democratic decision. If the people of, in our case, Bristol want to vote to not have that statue, I grew up in Bristol. If they want to vote to have it removed, I don't have a big problem with that.
But is that how we got here? That, there was a referendum in Bristol on statues? No, it was a bunch of freaking Marxist crazies.
Oh, yeah.
right?
There was actually a vote in Bristol, and they voted to keep the statue. So,
No, but I mean at the beginning, right? When it begins, right? When it begins, it's just the people going there and putting red paint over Churchill's statue. It's not. It's not a
and I'm totally against
groundswell.
that.
Right.
I'm totally against that. Right. I'm just look. We've got Seb. The thing for us is, it's that Nietzsche quote: "When you stare long enough into the abyss also stares into you."
Right.
All of us who are challenging this ridiculous stuff have got to remember not to become what we hate. And I think that's really important, to maintain our open-mindedness, to make sure that we listen to everybody. We take good ideas, even if they're suggested by people that we don't like, and we reject bad ideas, even when they're suggested by people that we like. I think that's very, very important. And I try to model that as best I can. I will always fail eventually.
That lovely note of Russian optimism. FF, BBC, salvageable.
Right. The problem is that whenever I'm confronted with this question, I immediately hark back to my childhood, the great comedies of the BBC, the wonderful documentaries it produces, David Attenborough, etc.
It's like ancient history. The two Ronnies. It's like ancient history.
Yeah. Yeah, and I have such affection for the quality of content that they used to produce.
Right.
The problem is I think they've gone too far down a particular route, and not even with the content they produce, but with the people that they hire. They tend to be, university educated. They tend to be very liberal, very metropolitan, very pro-Remain, etc., etc. So, and the problem is when you get a certain type of person, you create essentially a large echo chamber.
Yeah.
And at that point, they can't see somebody else's point of view. They can't understand why people think differently, and they're only going to produce a certain type of content. And at that moment, the content that they're producing is out of step with the vast majority of people, or the silent majority, as they're often known in this country. And I really worry. But the reason I really want the BBC to work is that the BBC has the power to be the middle ground. It has the power to hold both sides of the discussion and bring them together. Because I think one of the issues that America has is that it's because of the media that you have, it's too polarized. Whereas in the UK, we still have the chance to have someone from the left, someone from the right, Brexit, whatever else, come together and have a discussion. And I just worry that if we get rid of the BBC, that anchor is going to be lost. However, to answer your question, I think it's inevitable. I think it's already gone too far down. And I think the reality is that the battle is already lost.
Right.
Seb, I sort of agree with what Francis just said, but I'm curious to ask you, in the spirit of making this more of a conversation, you're obviously in the United States, where the media landscape is very sort of, you get this type of news and you get that type of news, and if you're a Fox News viewer, this is what you want, and CNN and so on. Do you think that's a model that makes for a better society than what you might hope to achieve with the BBC bringing people together?
Well, I just look. I'm a guy who lives in the real world. I can talk to you for hours about theories of international relations and national security, but if it doesn't have an impact on the real world, you're just wasting my time and your time. So I look at reality, and I look at the fact that if your viewers may not be familiar, and hopefully you guys will repost this video as well. The taxpayer. So in the UK, you have to buy a TV license. Everybody has to pay 170 quid, 160 quid a year that goes to the BBC, whether or not you watch their crap or not. Here, the taxpayer, hold on, just grab the chair, okay? The taxpayer funds public radio and public television to the tune of $500 million.
Wow.
$500 million, okay? 500 million. And it's shit. It is left wing. It's voices on Valium. They always talk like this, and it's very, very modulated. But it's left wing crap. They went after the president for 4 years. VOA, the Voice of America, which is expressly funded to share US values abroad and help democracies, when I was deputy assistant to President Trump, wrote hit pieces on me. These are government employees. They're actually technically government employees writing hit pieces on the alt-right fascists in the White House. Okay, this is how unifying public media is in America. Now, what I wanted to say instantly to Francis when he was talking is, and I know, look, I judge the UK on my childhood and on what I get through, the Daily Mail or, Sky News and garbage like that. You cannot judge America on Fox News and CNN. I'll tell you why. Because I've been in real America, where before I joined the White House, I was traveling 20, 30,000 miles a month because I worked with the military and the FBI trying to explain ISIS. So I was traveling through all the different commands, traveling across the country. Once you get outside of the bi-coastal elites, once you get outside of DC, New York, Boston, most of California, people aren't polarized. They're not, I'm a Fox viewer and only Fox, or I only a Washington Post. They couldn't care less. They want to buy a new pair of shoes for the kids at the end of the month and make the car payment. Most Americans are really apolitical in the best sense, not dumb and ignoring it, just common sense salt of the earth. So the idea that we're massively polarized is only true in the large conurbations. And beyond that, you got to have historic perspective. Look at the pamphleteers of 200 years ago. Look at the Lincoln-Douglas debates. You think that things get spicy on CNN or Fox News? Guys, you ain't seen what they called each other, you whoring bastard and all that kind of stuff, in the pamphlets of 200 years ago. So, which is the same in the UK. Go back to the times of Samuel Johnson and Bunyan and everybody else. It was it was pretty spicy back then. So I think we have to understand that DC. It isn't, South Dakota, and not write off the paucity of media based upon what we see coming out of the mainstream. And I think, look, guys, I think you are an example of why things are so positive right now, because you can get on there with, I know it took you a couple of different landlords and a couple of different producers, but you stuck through it, and you have a superb podcast. And I think what you're producing is what quote unquote media should be about. So let me end this on a question to both of you, because first I doff my cap. Keep doing what you do wherever you are. It's superb. I love it, and I'm going to promote it as much as I can. What is your message to those who realize something is wrong, want there to be a little bit more sanity, but who really are feeling cowed, and who really think that the doyens of cancel culture are all-powerful Sith lords, and you must kneel at the altar of political correctness? Because you've been there and you've fought through. So what would your message, one by one, be to those who are watching right now who feel a little bit intimidated?
I would say to them, if you're feeling a little bit intimidated, realize that you are not on your own. That the opinions that you hold are held by the vast majority of people, that you're not evil, racist, or stupid. You are just somebody who simply has common sense and reflects the world as they see it. And you can disagree with someone, and it doesn't mean that you're going to lose a friendship. It doesn't mean that they're a bad person or you're a bad person. And that what we need to all do is return to a time where we had friends who were on the left or on the right. We disagreed with them politically, yet they were still our friends, our parents, our lovers, our family, whatever they may be. And I think that's really, really important. People now talk about politics like it is the most important thing. And that's deeply unhealthy as a society. The most important thing are the human relationships you have with the people who you surround each other with.
And your families. Yeah. Absolutely. That's beautiful.
Most important thing.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, look, I'm sure a lot of your listeners and viewers have read the Gulag Archipelago and Solzhenitsyn's work. And, if you read that, the one thing that shines out of those books is that lying or living with lies is not only harmful to you as a person, it's also harmful to society. And the refusal to live by lies is always a dangerous move. It's always been punished, but we're very fortunate. We live in an age, 300-400 years ago, the three of us would have been burnt at the stake by now, but we're not. We're able to speak, we're able to have this conversation, and the same is true for everybody listening at home. So I would say live not by lies, and be practical too. I mean, if you're going to put yourself in a position where people are going to come after you, make sure that you prepare the groundwork so you can't be cancelled, right? Don't just go out in a blaze of glory for no reason. Make sure you put yourself in a position where you're independent. And if they do try to cancel you, it's more of a help than it is a hindrance. I think that's important. So lay the groundwork, but do not live by lies.
Fabulous, guys. Superb. Anything you guys want to plug? Where can people get their Triggernometry mugs?
Well, just head over to Triggernometry on YouTube and at TriggerPod on all the social media. And just like to say thank you very much for having us on the show, Seb. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely superb stuff. Superb. Say hi to Poon Poon. I didn't see any photo bombing from Anton, so I'm still a little suspicious, but can't wait to see next video tonight. We've been talking to Francis Foster, Konstantin Kisin. I'm Sebastian Gorka. God bless you both. Keep doing what you do. Thank you, guys.
Cheers. Thanks, Seb.
Cheers. Oh, give me the mic.
We got you back.
One last thing for me. What is the name of those biscuits you keep talking about? I can't